Every Sunday, the market came alive. From the moment I stepped onto its dusty lanes, a wave of colors, smells, and sounds welcomed me. Sellers called out, "Fresh mangoes, sweet bananas, cheap onions." Their words filled the air like music. The market was not only a place to buy food, it was a place to listen, to watch, and to learn. Every shout, every laugh, every small conversation was like a free English lesson. By listening carefully, I could practice new words. By watching people bargain, I could learn how to use sentences in real life. People hurried past with bags in their hands, shopkeepers smiled, and children played. Everywhere there were stories, and everywhere there was language. Today, I was not only going to the market, I was also going to practice my English in the middle of life's busiest classroom. Chapter 1. The Morning Journey. The sun had just begun to rise when I opened my eyes. A pale golden light slipped through the thin curtains of my room, painting the walls in soft shades of yellow. The air was still cool, carrying with it the faint smell of morning dew and fresh bread from the nearby bakery. I stretched my arms, yawned, and felt a sudden excitement. Today, I would go to the market. The market was not far from my home, but it always felt like another world, a place full of colors, voices, and surprises. I quickly washed my face, combed my hair, and put on my simple cotton shirt. My small cloth bag lay folded on the table. I picked it up, knowing it would soon be filled with vegetables, fruits, and perhaps something unexpected. When I stepped outside, the street was already waking up. Women swept their doorsteps. A milkman walked past with metal cans hanging on both sides of his bicycle. Children in uniforms hurried toward school, their laughter mixing with the calls of crows sitting on electric wires. The town was alive. I began walking toward the market road. The path was narrow but busy, lined with small tea stalls. Steam rose from boiling kettles, and the smell of ginger tea floated in the air. Some men stood in groups, sipping from small glasses and talking about politics, cricket, and the weather. I smiled as I passed them. Their words rose and fell like the buzz of bees. As I got closer, I noticed more people moving in the same direction as me. Women with baskets, men pulling wooden carts, and young boys carrying empty sacks. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry, yet there was a joy on their faces, as if they were all heading toward the same festival. A rickshaw passed by, the driver calling out, "Market! Market! Anyone for the market?" The wheels rattled over the stones, and a woman climbed inside with her little daughter, holding her tightly. The girl waved at me shyly, her small eyes sparkling with curiosity. The smell began to change as I walked further. At first it was the sharp, earthy smell of vegetables from a distance. Then came the strong, salty air of dried fish hanging in baskets by the roadside. I wrinkled my nose but laughed. It was all part of the market's story. Soon I heard the first shouts. A man's voice rang out, "Fresh bananas, sweet bananas, only 10 taka." Another voice quickly followed, "Tomatoes, tomatoes, bright and red, best in the town." The sounds overlapped, creating a music of trade that grew louder with every step I took. The closer I came, the more crowded the street became. A boy ran past me holding a tray full of eggs so carefully, as if his life depended on it. An old man pushed a wooden cart stacked with leafy greens, and 2 goats trotted beside him, pulling at the rope tied around their necks. I paused at the gate of the market. Before me stood a world of colors and chaos. Red chilies shone like fire, piles of green cucumbers lay fresh with drops of water, and bright yellow mangoes glowed like little suns. The voices of sellers filled the air like 100 drums beating at once. I took a deep breath. This was it. The heart of the town. The place where life gathered every morning. I stepped forward, my bag in hand, ready to begin the journey through the market. Chapter 2. First glimpse of the market. The moment I stepped through the old iron gate of the market, it was as if I had entered a different world. Outside, the road had been noisy and crowded, but inside the market everything seemed doubled. Doubled in color, doubled in sound, doubled in life. The first thing that caught my eyes were the rows of stalls stretching in every direction. Some were made of wood, others were nothing more than bamboo poles with cloth roofs, yet each was alive with goods. Bright red chilies, shining like fire, were piled high on a cloth. Fresh cucumbers lay cool and wet, drops of water sliding down their green skin. Yellow lemons formed little mountains on wooden boards, glowing like lamps in the morning sun. The smell was just as powerful. The sharp scent of onions filled the air, mixed with the freshness of coriander and the sweet perfume of ripe guavas. Somewhere close by, someone was roasting peanuts, and the warm, nutty smell drifted through the crowd. It was not one smell, but hundreds mixing together, telling the story of food and life. And then, of course, the sounds. Sellers were shouting at the top of their voices, each one trying to win the attention of passing customers. "Come here, brother, best carrots in town. Sweet mangoes, taste one and you will take 10. Fish fresh from the river, still moving, still shining." The calls overlapped until it sounded almost like music, rough, loud, but strangely beautiful. Customers answered back with their own voices, bargaining and laughing. A woman shook her head and said, "Too much. I will not pay that price." The shopkeeper smiled and lowered it, saying, "For you, sister, special price." Children added to the soundscape too. A little boy tugged at his mother's sari, pointing to a basket of oranges. "Ma, I want one, just one," he pleaded. The mother scolded softly, but finally bought him one. The boy bit into the orange, juice running down his chin, and his laughter rang like a bell. I walked deeper into the lanes, trying to take in everything at once. The ground was uneven, full of mud in some places and dry dust in others. People moved in all directions, brushing past me as they carried bags and baskets. A man with a bamboo pole balanced across his shoulders walked carefully. On each side hung a basket full of brinjals. He moved slowly, whispering, "Careful, careful," as the crowd made space for him. I noticed the small details, too. A young girl sat beside her mother's stall, arranging limes in a neat round circle. Every time a customer bought one, she quickly filled the empty space with another lime, making the circle perfect again. Nearby, an old man sat cross-legged with a weighing scale, his wrinkled hands moving calmly as he measured rice for a customer. And then there were the colors. The market looked like a festival ground. Bright fabrics covered some stalls, shielding them from the sun. Red, blue, yellow, and green umbrellas stood tall, shining like giant flowers. People's clothes added to the mix. Women in colorful saris, men in checked lungis, children in school uniforms, all blending into a moving painting. Some stalls were quiet, especially those selling less popular items. A shopkeeper with a pile of clay pots sat silently, waiting for customers. His eyes followed the crowd with hope. From time to time he tapped one of his pots gently, producing a soft sound, as if reminding people, "I am here too." The deeper I walked, the more alive the market felt. It wasn't just a place to buy and sell. It was a living theater. Every seller was an actor with their voice, every buyer a player with their bargaining skill, and every child an audience, laughing, crying, or playing. I tightened the strap of my bag on my shoulder. The market was calling me to explore further. Fruits, vegetables, fish, spices, clothes. Every corner promised a new story. And somewhere ahead, I knew I would find more than just food. I would find the spirit of the people themselves. Chapter 3. The Fruit Seller's Corner. I turned into a lane where the air felt sweeter. It was the fruit seller's corner, and it looked like a garden had spilled itself out onto wooden tables and bamboo baskets. Everywhere I looked, colors sparkled: red, green, orange, yellow, fruits of every kind arranged in neat piles, shining under the morning sun. At the very front sat a cheerful man with a large turban and a wide smile. His stall was the brightest of them all. Green grapes hung in clusters like tiny jewels, bananas were tied in bunches, and shiny apples sat stacked in a pyramid, so carefully placed that it seemed they would topple at the slightest touch. He shouted in a strong, rhythmic voice, "Apples, fresh apples, sweet as honey, shining like glass. Who wants apples today?" His voice carried far, and people stopped to look. Two women stepped closer, their children pulling at their saris, pointing at the bananas. One of the women asked the price of apples. The fruit seller quickly replied with a big grin, "For you, sister, only 30 taka for a kilo. You will not find sweeter apples in the whole market." The woman shook her head, pretending to walk away. "Too much. 25, not a taka more." The fruit seller laughed as if the bargain were a game he loved to play. No, I would starve if I sold at that price. Look at these apples, shining like red suns. Taste one." He picked one up, polished it on his sleeve, and handed it to her. The woman bit into it. Juice ran down her lips. Her eyes widened. She tried to hide her smile, but her child clapped his hands, saying, "Ma, buy them, buy them." Finally, she agreed at 28. The seller weighed the apples on his brass scale, carefully balancing the weights, and tipped them into her bag. As she walked away, he clapped his hands and called out again, his energy never fading. Beside him, another stall sold guavas, papayas, and pineapples. A young boy, probably the seller's son, stood on a wooden stool, slicing a papaya for a customer. He cut it neatly and offered a small piece on a stick. "Taste, uncle, very sweet," he said shyly. The man tasted, nodded, and bought two. The boy's face lit up with pride. Further down, an old woman sat behind a small stall of seasonal fruits. Her baskets held only a few mangoes, some jackfruit pieces, and a pile of blackberries. She didn't shout like the others. She simply sat quietly, her wrinkled hands arranging the fruits again and again. A young college girl stopped at her stall and bought a handful of blackberries. The old woman's eyes softened, and she blessed the girl softly. "May your life be as sweet as these berries." The fruit corner wasn't just about buying and selling. It was full of little dramas. I watched as a young boy sneaked an orange from a basket and tried to hide it under his shirt. The seller caught him quickly, but instead of shouting, he laughed. "You must be hungry, boy. Take the orange, but next time ask me first." The boy ran away with the fruit, smiling with embarrassment. Near the end of the row, a group of men gathered around a stall where melons were being cut open to show their freshness. The seller lifted a half-cut melon high, its red flesh glittering in the sun. He shouted, "See this color! Sweetness from heaven!" The crowd laughed and bought slices, eating them right there, juice dripping onto their hands. I stood for a while, taking it all in: the bargaining voices, the laughter of children, the smell of ripe mangoes. The fruit corner felt like the heart of the market, where sweetness wasn't just in the fruits, but also in the people, their jokes, and their little acts of kindness. I adjusted my bag, now a little heavier with apples and guavas. Ahead, I could already hear another kind of sound: the sharper cries of vegetable sellers, the clatter of scales, and the rustle of green leaves. The fruit sellers had given me sweetness. The vegetable rows, I knew, would give me noise, color, and even more life. And so I stepped forward. Chapter 4: The Vegetable Rows. As I left the fruit corner behind, the air around me changed. The sweet perfume of mangoes and guavas faded, replaced by the sharp, earthy smell of fresh vegetables. I entered the long row of stalls where piles of green, red, and brown seemed to stretch endlessly, each stall overflowing with the harvest of nearby villages. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Vegetable sellers had the loudest voices in the market. Men and women stood behind heaps of goods, calling out prices again and again. Fresh spinach, green as the morning fields. Potatoes, onions, garlic, cheap, cheap, cheap. Tomatoes shining like rubies, don't miss them. Their calls overlapped like waves crashing against each other, filling the narrow lane with constant noise. Customers pushed through, some with baskets, others with jute bags, looking carefully at each item before deciding. At one stall, a woman in a red sari leaned over a basket of onions. She picked them one by one, pressing them gently, then looked up at the shopkeeper. "These are small, don't cheat me, lower the price." The shopkeeper raised his eyebrows dramatically. "Small? Sister, these onions are from the best farm in the district. Sweet, strong, no tears when you cut them. I am already giving them almost free." The woman wasn't fooled. She pointed to the stall across the lane where another seller was shouting a lower price. The bargaining began. Voices rose, hands moved, and finally the woman smiled triumphantly. She got her onions cheaper, while the seller pretended to look defeated. But as she walked away, he winked at another customer, showing he had still made a fair profit. I walked further and saw a group of children running between the stalls. One of them, a small boy, accidentally bumped into a basket of cucumbers. They rolled across the muddy ground, scattering everywhere. For a moment the shopkeeper shouted angrily, but then he saw the frightened boy's face. He sighed, bent down, and picked up the cucumbers himself, muttering, "Kids are like the wind. They never stay still." The boy whispered a quick, "Sorry, uncle," and ran off. Some customers laughed softly at the scene, shaking their heads. Further down, a man was weighing carrots on an old brass scale. He carefully placed small stone weights on one side, while the customer leaned forward to watch. "Don't put your thumb there," the man warned, half joking, half serious. "I am an honest seller. My carrots are straight, and so is my heart." The customer laughed and handed him the money. The vegetable rows were alive with colors too. Bright red chilies spread on mats, shining like fire under the sun. Bundles of spinach tied neatly with strings looked like little green rivers. Cauliflowers, large and white, lay in piles, their leaves spreading out like protective arms. Some stalls even had small flowers tucked between the vegetables, as if to decorate the display. I noticed an old woman selling only one thing: pumpkins. She had a dozen of them arranged in a perfect circle. She didn't shout like the others. Instead, she simply waited, her eyes calm. When a young couple stopped and chose one, She smiled so gently that it felt like a blessing with every sale. But not everything was calm. At the far end of the lane I saw two men arguing loudly. One had bought a bag of beans, but after walking a few steps he came back, shouting that half were rotten. The seller insisted they were fine. Their quarrel drew a crowd, with people watching as if it were a street play. Finally, an elderly man from another stall stepped in, checked the beans, and settled the fight by suggesting the seller replace half the bag. The crowd cheered as if justice had been done, and life in the market went on. I walked slowly, my bag heavier now with onions, tomatoes, and cucumbers. The vegetable rows had given me more than food. They had shown me voices full of energy, arguments full of drama, and smiles full of warmth. Ahead, I could hear a different kind of noise, louder, sharper, mixed with splashing water. It was the fish market calling, and so I moved forward. Chapter 5. The Fish Market. As I left the vegetable rows behind, the air changed again. A strong salty smell filled my nose, mixed with the sharp scent of ice melting in wooden boxes. The fish market had begun, and it was louder than any other part of the market. Wooden tables and low carts were piled high with fish, silver, gray, and shiny. Some were small and quick, others large and heavy. Fishermen shouted loudly, "Fresh fish! Just caught, big and shining! Try the prawns, sweet and fresh! Get your hilsa here, best in the town!" Water splashed as men tossed fish from baskets into the ice, and cats weaved through the legs of customers, hoping for a quick snack. I had to step carefully. The ground was wet and slippery. A boy, no older than 10, ran past carrying a basket of small fish. One slipped out and landed on the ground. The boy froze, but the seller smiled and picked it up. "Careful, little one. Fish are alive, but so is the market. Learn to move quickly," he said, and the boy laughed, relieved. Women bent over the tables, choosing carefully. They picked up fish, checking scales and eyes, tapping gently with fingers. Some argued over price, some over size. One woman complained, "This is too small." The seller shook his head. "Ma'am, every fish has its story. Take it, cook it, and you'll see." Nearby, a group of men gathered around a cart of prawns. The seller showed them, lifting one in the air. "See, fresh today. From the river this morning." The men laughed and bought a handful, eating some right there, their hands wet and sticky. I noticed the rhythm of the place. Voices shouting, water splashing, feet slipping, laughter ringing. It all moved like a dance. Even the cats and stray dogs seemed part of it, chasing each other, leaping, disappearing between stalls. I stopped for a moment to watch an old man fillet a large fish. His hands moved fast and skillfully. Every cut was precise, almost like a dance. He didn't speak, yet everyone knew he was the master of this corner. The fish market was shorter, but its life was intense. Within just a few steps I had seen shouting, bargaining, laughter, small accidents, and skillful hands at work. It was noisy, wet, and chaotic, but it was alive. I took a deep breath, the smell of the river lingering in my nose. Ahead, I could smell something spicy and warm, spices and herbs from the next lane. I smiled and stepped forward, ready for the spice market. Chapter 6. The Spice Lane. As I left the fish market behind, a new smell caught me immediately, warm, sharp, and exciting. It was the smell of spices. The spice lane was narrower than the other sections, but it felt alive with colors and aromas that seemed to float in the air like dancing ribbons. Piles of powdered turmeric glowed golden under the morning sun. Red chili powder shone like tiny sparks of fire. Cardamom, cinnamon, cloves, and cumin filled small baskets, their scents mixing into a perfume that made me sneeze and smile at the same time. The sellers here were different from the others. Their voices were calmer, but each word carried authority. A man with a white beard and bright eyes called out, "Fresh spices, sweet cinnamon, hot as the sun. Come taste." A young woman stepped forward, sniffing a small pile of cloves. She held it close to her nose, inhaling deeply. "Yes, these are good," she said. The seller nodded proudly. "From my farm, sister. Only the best for my customers." Other sellers ground spices on large wooden mortars. The rhythmic pounding of the pestle echoed down the lane. One man, a tall fellow with a turban, offered small packets of cumin to children passing by. "Taste, little ones. Smell the magic." The children laughed, holding the spice in their tiny hands, while a mother shook her head, amused. Some customers were more serious. An old lady carefully measured coriander seeds, counting them by hand. She placed them gently in her bag and whispered to the seller, "May your day be full of smiles." The seller smiled back. "And may your cooking be full of happiness, ma'am." Not all moments were calm. At one stall, a boy accidentally knocked over a small basket of saffron threads. The seller gasped, bending down to save them, and the boy froze. "Careful, these are precious," the man said, but his tone was soft. He handed the boy a thread, teaching him how delicate each spice was. The boy ran off, amazed, while the crowd laughed quietly at the little lesson. The colors here were like no other. Bright yellows, deep reds, browns, and greens shone in every corner. Some sellers tied small bunches of dried chilies together like garlands and hung them above their stalls. Others placed tiny mirrors under spice piles so the sunlight reflected, making the powders sparkle. I walked slowly, smelling each stall, watching every movement. Women bargained gently, testing the spices between their fingers. Men discussed the best ways to cook with particular herbs. Children ran past, their laughter mixing with the rhythmic pounding of the pestles. And then I saw a small boy trying to imitate the sellers, picking up tiny amounts of turmeric and ginger, pretending to weigh them in his palm. People smiled and encouraged him. One seller leaned down and said, "You will be a master someday, little one, if you watch carefully." The boy's face lit up brighter than any pile of spice. The spice lane was full of life, aromas that made your nose tingle, colors that made your eyes dance, voices that rose and fell like music. Every stall was a story, every customer a character, every spice a little treasure. I adjusted my bag, now heavier with fruit, vegetables, and a few small spice packets I had bought. Ahead, I could hear the laughter of children and the rhythmic clapping of someone performing tricks. A street entertainer! I smiled. The spice lane had given me taste, smell, and color. Now it was time for a little music and fun in the market. I moved forward, curious to see the man who entertained everyone. Chapter 7. The Cloth Market. After leaving the spice lane, the air around me seemed to change again. No longer did the scents of turmeric or chili linger. Instead, the market became a riot of color. This was the cloth market, a place where fabrics of every hue and texture were displayed, hanging like rainbows in the morning sun. Stalls were crowded with bolts of cloth, silk, cotton, and wool. Bright reds, deep blues, and golden yellows shimmered under the sunlight. Some cloths were patterned with flowers, others with geometric shapes, and some were plain but so soft that you could feel their quality just by touching. Tailors and shopkeepers stood behind counters, their hands moving quickly as they measured, cut, and folded fabric. A man with a long tape measure draped over his shoulders shouted, "Silk! Pure silk! Soft as a cloud!" Women gathered around, touching and feeling the cloth, testing how it would feel against their skin. A mother and daughter were examining a bright red sari. The daughter twirled, letting the fabric fall around her. "Ma, this will look perfect," she said. Her mother smiled but carefully examined the weave, checking the edges. After some bargaining, they walked away with the sari, laughing. Nearby, a young boy ran errands for his father. He carried small rolls of cloth on his head, balancing them carefully as he weaved through the crowd. At one point, a piece slipped, but he caught it just in time. The crowd laughed and clapped at his skill. The boy grinned proudly. Some stalls were quieter, selling high-quality fabrics at higher prices. The sellers here spoke softly, letting the quality of their products do the talking. One elderly man with gray hair tied in a bun showed a customer fine embroidered silk. "Look at the stitching. Every thread tells a story," he said. The customer ran her fingers along the fabric, mesmerized. Children added life to the market. A group of boys played near a stack of wool, laughing as one pretended to pull a pretend sword out of the pile. Some girls peeked from behind bolts of fabric, giggling as they hid from their mothers. The colors were everywhere. Bright umbrellas above the stalls added more shade and sparkle. People's clothes added another layer of color. Women in saris of deep maroon, yellow, and green. Men in white lungis or shirts of various shades. Even the dirt road seemed less dull with all this movement and color. Occasionally there were small incidents. A cat jumped onto a pile of fabric, sending one bolt tumbling to the ground. The seller shook his head but laughed as a small boy picked it up and returned it carefully. Everyone around smiled. It was a moment of shared amusement in the busy market. As I walked through the cloth market, I felt the energy of creation and choice. Here people weren't just buying, they were imagining. Dresses, shirts, curtains, blankets. Every piece of cloth was part of someone's life story. With my bag now a little heavier and my heart full of the colors and sounds of the cloth market, I moved forward. I could hear claps and laughter echoing from ahead. A street entertainer must be performing near the central lane. The market was alive, and it always seemed to have a new story around every corner. Chapter 8. The Street Entertainer. As I walked past the cloth market, I heard a new kind of sound. Rhythmic clapping, laughter, and cheerful shouts. Ahead, in the middle of a wider lane, a small crowd had gathered. A street entertainer was performing, and he had captured everyone's attention. The man was not tall, but he wore a bright yellow vest and a red cap that looked almost too big for his head. He balanced on a small wooden box and waved his hands dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, watch carefully. Today you will see magic, music, and fun." Children pushed forward, eyes wide with excitement. Some parents followed, curious but smiling, while shopkeepers leaned out from their stalls, pausing their work to watch. The entertainer began by juggling small oranges, tossing them high into the air. Each time one spun, the crowd gasped. A little girl clapped so loudly that she nearly lost her balance, and her mother laughed, steadying her. Next he pulled a bright scarf from his pocket, twisting it and making it appear to float in the air. "Magic! Magic! See what the hands of a clever man can do!" he shouted. Children cheered, trying to imitate him, waving their small hands and giggling. The entertainer then invited a volunteer, a boy of about 8. The boy stepped forward nervously, holding a small stick. The entertainer guided him carefully, showing a simple trick with coins. The boy's eyes widened as he made a coin disappear and then reappear in his pocket. The crowd clapped and whistled, and the boy ran back to his mother, proud and laughing. Nearby, an old man selling nuts shook his head with a smile. "These people bring life to the market," he said softly. Another vendor nodded. "Yes, even for a few minutes they make everyone forget the heat, the noise, and the rush." The entertainer changed his act quickly. Now he was spinning plates on sticks, running across the small wooden boxes, balancing carefully. Each time a plate wobbled, the crowd held its breath. A stray dog ran past and barked, and the entertainer paused, waving it away gently. The children laughed at the dog's interruption, and even the adults chuckled. He finished his performance with a dramatic bow and a flourish of scarves. "Thank you, my friends. Remember, life is full of surprises. A smile is free, but its magic is priceless." The crowd clapped, some tossing small coins into his hat. He bowed again, picked up his bag, and disappeared into another lane, leaving laughter and chatter behind. I stood for a moment, watching the crowd slowly disperse. The entertainer had given everyone a small break from the busyness of the market. People returned to bargaining, choosing, and talking, but the energy felt lighter, happier. I adjusted my bag, already heavier with fruits, vegetables, and a few spice packets. Ahead, I could smell hot snacks, the fried treats of the food stalls. Children were tugging at their mothers' hands, asking for a sweet or a savory bite. The market had more stories, more surprises waiting for me. With a deep breath, I moved forward, curious to see what awaited in the food stalls, where taste, smell, and laughter combined in a delicious chaos. Chapter 9. The Food Stalls. Leaving the laughter of the street entertainer behind, I stepped into the food section of the market. The air changed again. It was warm, spicy, and full of tempting smells. Everywhere I looked, vendors were cooking and frying, steam rising in white clouds, mixing with the chatter of hungry customers. Small stalls lined the lane, each with a unique aroma. A man stirred a large pot of lentils, adding spices carefully while children watched in awe. Nearby, a woman flipped flatbreads on a hot griddle, the smell of butter and wheat filling the air. Another stall had sizzling samosas, their golden crusts glistening with oil, while steam escaped from the hot, spicy filling. People bustled around, plates in hand. Women carried small children, balancing baskets of vegetables on their heads, while men stood chatting, waiting for tea or snacks. The clinking of utensils, the hissing of frying pans, and the bubbling of pots created a lively symphony of the food market. A boy sold fresh sugarcane juice, squeezing stalks with a large wooden press. The juice ran into small glasses, and the children's eyes lit up as they drank. Some adults paused to sip, smiling at the sweet, refreshing taste in the warm morning. I walked past a small stall where a man was making sweet pancakes. He poured the batter onto a hot plate, flipping each carefully, and then topped it with honey. A little girl stood nearby, pressing her small hands together. "Please, Uncle, one for me." The man laughed and handed her a warm pancake. Her eyes sparkled as she ran back to her mother, licking her fingers. Near the corner, a group of men stood by a tea stall, laughing loudly. Steam rose from small clay cups of strong, sweet tea. One man accidentally spilled some on the ground. "Ah, I am so clumsy today," he said, wiping his hands. His friends laughed, teasing him, and he joined in, sipping the tea quickly. Even small incidents caught my attention. A stray dog tried to sneak a piece of fried bread from a stall. The vendor shouted, but then laughed as the dog ran away, tail wagging happily. Nearby, a little boy dropped his coin while buying a snack, and a kind customer picked it up and handed it back. Smiles and small acts of kindness seemed to fill the air as much as the smells of fried food. The food stalls were colorful too. Bright red chili powders, golden samosas, green coriander leaves, and golden brown fried bread made each stall a feast for the eyes. Women in colorful saris moved carefully, trying to balance food and children, while men jostled lightly, making space for one another. I stopped for a moment, buying a small plate of fried snacks. The hot, spicy taste made my mouth tingle, and I smiled. The food stalls were more than just a place to eat. They were a place of laughter, small surprises, and stories unfolding at every corner. With my bag heavier and my stomach a little happier, I moved toward the next section, hearing raised voices and the clatter of baskets. Something unusual was happening ahead. Trouble maybe, or just another story waiting to unfold in the lively market. Chapter 10. A Little Trouble in the Market. As I walked past the food stalls, the cheerful noise of the market suddenly changed. Ahead, voices were louder, sharper, and tense. I quickened my pace, curious to see what was happening. Near a small vegetable stall, two men were arguing. One held a bag of beans and shook it angrily. "These beans are rotten! I demand my money back!" he shouted. The other, the seller, waved his hands, trying to calm the man. No, they are fresh. Look at them carefully. Only a few might be bad. Please check properly." A small crowd had gathered around, stopping their shopping to watch. Women held baskets, children peeked from behind, and even the street entertainer from earlier had paused nearby. The tension was like a sudden storm in the middle of the busy market. A young boy, probably the seller's helper, tried to pick up a bean that had fallen to the ground, but the man pushed his hand away. "I want a full refund. This is unfair," he yelled. The crowd murmured, some agreeing with the customer, others with the seller. Just then an elderly man from a nearby spice stall stepped forward. He was calm and careful, his voice soft but firm. "Stop, both of you. Let's see the truth. Take a few beans, check them one by one." He handed a small handful to the angry customer. Slowly the man examined them, and it became clear that most were fine, only a couple were bad. The seller nodded and smiled. "See? Mostly fresh. I will replace the few bad ones for you." The angry man's face softened. "All right. I suppose that is fair," he muttered. He took the new beans, weighed carefully, and handed over the money. The crowd relaxed. Some laughed quietly at the dramatic scene, while others returned to their shopping. Even the boy helper let out a sigh of relief. The elderly man patted him on the shoulder. "See? Patience and calm solve more problems than shouting." Nearby, a stray dog, attracted by the beans that fell earlier, sniffed around and ran off, unnoticed. Children giggled, pointing at the little thief, and some women smiled at the wisdom of the elderly man. The market's energy slowly returned to normal. Sellers resumed calling out their goods, women examined vegetables carefully, and the sounds of chopping, bargaining, and laughter filled the air once more. It was as if the incident had added a little excitement to the day, a story that people would talk about for hours. I adjusted my bag, now heavier with fruits, vegetables, and snacks, and felt a strange warmth. Even in small troubles, the market had a way of teaching patience, kindness, and understanding. As I walked toward the evening stalls, I noticed the sunlight starting to change, golden and soft. Shadows grew longer, and the market was preparing for the end of the day. Ahead, the glow of lanterns and the gentle hum of closing shops welcomed me to the next chapter, the quiet and reflection of evening in the market. Chapter 11. Evening in the Market. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a golden-orange glow over the market. The bustling noise of the morning and afternoon softened, replaced by a gentle murmur of voices. Stalls that had been crowded and colorful were now quieter, the sellers preparing to close for the day. The vegetable vendors stacked their unsold goods carefully, wrapping spinach and coriander leaves in damp cloth to keep them fresh for tomorrow. Piles of tomatoes and onions were covered, and the air smelled cooler, a mixture of earth, herbs, and the faint trace of spices still lingering from the spice lane. Women hurried to finish their last purchases, balancing baskets and bags. Children tugged at their mothers' hands, tired from a long day of running through the market. A little boy held a sweet from the food stalls in his hand, licking it slowly, savoring every bite as his mother laughed at his sticky fingers. The fruit sellers were carefully stacking their remaining apples, bananas, and guavas. The cheerful man with the turban, who had greeted every customer with a smile earlier, now counted his earnings quietly. He looked around at the emptying lanes and whispered to his young helper, "Another day done, my boy. Tomorrow we begin again." The boy nodded, eyes tired but happy. Even the street entertainer had packed his small props. The laughter and applause of earlier had faded, but the echoes of joy seemed to linger in the air. Children waved as he walked past, and he bowed, tipping his cap. The market had been a stage, and now it was quiet, but full of memories from the day. Some small incidents still caught my attention. A stray dog curled up near a stall, finally resting after chasing food all morning. An old woman sitting behind her pumpkin stall closed her eyes for a brief moment, humming softly. A boy who had accidentally dropped his coin earlier smiled as he walked past the same stall, proud to have returned the borrowed coin to its owner. The lanterns were lit one by one, casting a warm glow over the market lanes. Shadows grew longer, stretching across the stones and dirt paths. The vibrant colors of fabrics, fruits, and vegetables looked different now, softer and golden in the evening light. It was a peaceful end to a lively day. Shopkeepers greeted each other, exchanging quiet words and smiles. A man carrying the last of his spices walked slowly, glancing at the remaining customers, and nodded. "See you tomorrow," he said softly. People responded in kind, sharing a small ritual of connection that made the market feel like a living community, not just a place of trade. I adjusted my bag, now full and heavy with the day's purchases, and took a deep breath. The market had been more than just a place to buy and sell. It had been alive with stories, small adventures, laughter, learning, and even a little trouble. Each corner had its own rhythm, each stall its own character, and each person a small part of the larger story. As I stepped toward the main gate, the sky glowing with the last colors of the sunset, I felt a strange happiness. I had walked through the heart of the town, witnessed life in all its forms, and carried with me not just food and goods, but memories of a day in the market. Chapter 12. Going Home. The sun had almost disappeared behind the distant rooftops, leaving the sky painted in soft shades of pink and purple. The market, once alive with shouting, laughter, and clattering, had slowed to a gentle hum, The air was cooler now, carrying the faint smell of spices, earth, and fresh produce. I walked slowly towards the main gate, my bag heavy with the day's purchases, fruits, vegetables, spices, and even a few small treats I had picked up from the food stalls. Each item felt like a little memory, a token of the busy life I had witnessed in the market. The vendors were finishing their work. The fruit sellers stacked the last of their apples carefully, the bright green of grapes and the reds of cherries catching the last light of day. The vegetable sellers swept the dusty lanes, making sure nothing was left behind. Even the spice sellers were closing, bundling their powders into small packets, ready to greet customers the next morning. I passed the cloth market one last time. The fabrics, now slightly dim in the fading light, looked softer and calmer. Some tailors were folding rolls of cloth, while others counted their earnings quietly, exchanging friendly nods with neighbors. The energy of the day had given way to a quiet satisfaction. Children still lingered near the food stalls, finishing their sweets, while parents gathered their belongings, preparing to leave. The street entertainer had long gone, but I could still hear faint laughter echoing from nearby streets, a reminder of the joy he had spread earlier. As I walked, I reflected on the market, not just as a place to buy goods, but as a place full of life and stories. Each stall, each person, had their own rhythm and personality. The sellers called out with energy. The customers bargained, laughed, and sometimes argued. Even small incidents, a child dropping a coin, a stray dog stealing food, a few bad beans, added life and color to the day. I paused for a moment at the main gate, looking back at the market. The lanterns glowed softly, the last vendors were closing their shutters, and a gentle breeze carried away the day's dust and smells. It felt peaceful, yet alive in memory. I smiled, knowing I had witnessed something special, a slice of life that was ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. The walk home was quiet. I could hear the distant sounds of the town winding down, dogs barking in the distance, the soft murmur of evening conversations, and the faint clatter of carts returning home. My bag was heavy, but my heart felt light. The market had given me more than goods. It had given me a story to remember, small lessons in patience, kindness, and joy. By the time I reached my home, the sky had turned deep blue, and the first stars began to appear. I put down my bag, unpacked the day's treasures, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The market had been a world in itself, full of colors, sounds, smells, and life. As I sat by the window, looking at the quiet streets outside, I thought about the day and smiled. Tomorrow the market would wake again, bringing new stories, new people, and new moments, and I would be ready to witness them, one step, one lane, one story at a time.